Any AAA open-world RPG is going to be a complex, multifaceted experience by definition, but Dragon's Dogma 2 really cranks that up to 11. This is a massive game, and it's densely packed with a bevy of systems that constantly interact with each other in unique ways to deliver unforgettable, emergent gameplay. It is, at the same time, not a game that's going to hold your hand in any way, even the most fundamental ways that you would take for granted in any open-world game or RPG, which means that there can be a bit of a learning curve to understand how everything functions, especially in the early hours, and especially if you're a newcomer to the genre. As such, here, we're going to go over a few beginner tips and tricks that will make your initial hours in Dragon's Dogma 2 a little bit smoother. Human or Beastren. The first choice you'll make in Dragon's Dogma 2 is whether you want to play as a human or a Beastren, the latter being a new race introduced in this game. By and large, however, this isn't a choice that you should be fretting too much about. There might be some instances where you see NPCs behaving a little differently around you based on which race you're playing as, but for the most part, the difference is going to be largely cosmetic, so just choose based on your own preference here. Pay attention to quest descriptions. Dragon's Dogma 2 isn't a game that's going to do too much or any handholding. Instead, it expects you to pay attention to what it shows and tells you. For instance, when you're accepting a quest, you're going to want to pay attention to what the quest giver tells you about, or at least to the quest description in your log, because things such as waypoints are non-existent in this game, so if a quest requires you to wear a certain attire, the game isn't going to mark a place on the map where you'll be able to get your hands on it. You're going to have to figure it out, and where to get it yourself. Then, go into your inventory to put it on before you can unlock the quest's next step. Time-bound quests. Here's another reason to pay attention to NPCs when they're giving out quests. Quests in Dragon's Dogma 2 are often time-bound, and if you keep them in your queue for too long, you're going to automatically fail them. When you're accepting the quest, listen to the dialogue. That will be the only way to know if it's time-sensitive, and if it is, it's recommended that you prioritize it over other quests right away. Also, don't take on multiple of these at the same time. Pay attention to your pawns. Pawns in Dragon's Dogma 2 are useful in a number of ways. Obviously, combat is where they shine first and foremost, but even outside of combat, they have their uses. From spots where you can harvest materials and resources, to notices in the environment that you can read, gather new information, to ladders or caves that might lead to hidden areas, pawns will frequently call out things that catch their attention, so make sure to keep an ear out. Party composition. Though you certainly can play Dragon's Dogma 2 without the company of pawns, having a full party can make things a lot easier for you both in and out of combat. As such, it's important to be mindful of your party's composition. That, of course, means keeping an eye out on the vocations of each of the pawns in your company. But beyond that, it's also important to consider their traits. For instance, some pawns might be more inclined to hang back and provide support during fights, while others will like to charge headlong into danger. Also, make sure that you keep changing the 2 spots for recruitable pawns in your party, because unlike your main pawn, they don't level up. Reviving pawns. Death is pretty common in Dragon's Dogma 2, and that's especially true for your pawns, who are generally not quite as capable as you are. They are AI controlled after all. You always have the ability to revive them should they fall in the middle of combat, but given how long that can take, that's always a risky endeavor. You can't wait too long to revive them either, however, because their bodies disappear after a while, after which you need to find a riftstone to fill up your party again, and those aren't exactly abundant. As such, finding the right windows to revive your pawns is crucial. One particularly helpful method is picking up a pawn's corpse, just stand next to them and press R2 or the right trigger, and carry them a safe distance away, which will give you enough time to revive them before your foes can interrupt. Pawn quests. Dragon's Dogma 2 is a single-player only experience by and large, but it does sprinkle in multiplayer elements by allowing you to recruit other players' pawns, and sending out your own pawns to be recruited by others. The latter can also be quite helpful. Each time you make your pawn available for recruiting, you can give them a specific quest to complete, while they can also gain additional knowledge of the world and of how to progress in certain quests that they can then share with you when they come back. Additionally, when recruiting other players' pawns from a riftstone, you can also specifically search for ones that will give you hints about how to progress in whatever quest you have set as the active one at that time, which also can come in handy. Pawn commands. This one might seem a bit obvious, but it can be surprisingly easy to simply forget about pawn commands, especially when you're not in combat. By utilizing the pawn command set to the D-pad, you can direct your pawns to gather materials, open chests, and more, while they can be almost necessary to use in certain other situations as well. For instance, if you spot a chest across a ravine and try to make your way over, make sure to tell your pawns to wait for you, because if you don't, in their attempts to follow you across the ravine, there's a good chance they'll end up falling to their deaths. Experiment with vocations. Right off the bat, Dragon's Dogma 2 lets you play as one of 4 vocations, with more being unlocked as you get deeper into the game. And though you might be tempted to stick with a single vocation, our recommendation would be to spend some time with at least a handful. Each vocation plays in drastically different ways from all others, and each comes with unique mechanics, strengths, and weaknesses, and you never know which of them might end up appealing to your tastes in its own way. Grabbing enemies. Grabbing enemies and latching onto them is a core mechanic in Dragon's Dogma 2's combat, especially when you're taking on larger foes. It is, in fact, something that you should be looking to do as often as you can. When you attack enemies when you're latched onto them, you deal extra damage, while the chances of stunning them are also much higher, which in turn gives you the window to deal even greater damage. Use the environment to your advantage. The environment can come to your aid in unexpected ways in Dragon's Dogma 2's combat. Sometimes it could be as simple as spotting an exploding barrel and tossing it at an enemy, or rolling a giant rock down a hill and crashing it into a sleeping troll. Sometimes when an enemy is standing close to a ledge, you could bash your shield into them, provided you're playing as a fighter and have that skill unlocked, to send them plummeting to their deaths, while other times it pays to keep an eye out for things that you can climb on top of to jump off of and grab onto the particularly large enemies. Bottom line, stay sharp. Inventory management. Role-playing game fans will be more than familiar with this, but Dragon's Dogma 2 is very stringent with its inventory limitations. You can become over-encumbered very easily, which means you have to be extra judicious about how much stuff you pick up, especially because the really heavy things in your inventory, like your weapons, your armor, and lantern, can't, or shouldn't to be more precise, really be discarded. One really useful way of easing up those restrictions is to use your pawns as mules, which is yet another reason to always travel with a full party. Keep visiting inns. Inns aren't terribly abundant in Dragon's Dogma 2, but when you find one, it's a good idea to take some time to rest. You accumulate damage over time that not only depletes your health, but also your max HP, which can only be recovered by sleeping. Additionally, inns are also the only place where you can put things into storage to free up some inventory space, so even if you don't plan on sleeping, a visit can still be useful. Always travel with a camping kit. As mentioned, you can often go surprisingly long distances between inns in Dragon's Dogma 2, but thankfully, the world does have plenty of camping spots scattered everywhere. Though you can't sort your storage at camps, you can sleep and even cook up meals for buffs. You will, however, require a camping kit, so make sure you always have at least one of those in your inventory if you know you're heading out on a long journey. Do keep in mind, though, that the camping kits tend to weigh a lot, which means inventory management becomes an even bigger headache. Advancing time. The passage of time has very tangible consequences in Dragon's Dogma 2, not only because of the time-bound nature of some quests, but also because NPCs in the world often tend to follow specific schedules. While outside of settlements and cities, the world also becomes significantly more dangerous at nighttime. There are some ways to advance the time in the game, however. For starters, you can sleep at an inn or a campsite. But if you don't want to do that, if you're in settlements, you'll also often find places where you can just sit and pass the time, like benches. Hey, did you know that we at Gaming Bolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.